After 3 years of claiming neutrality in World War I, in 1917, Germany announced they would resume unrestricted warfare in war zone waters, and the United States could no longer stay neutral. They decided to break their ties with Germany, and just a few short hours later, the American liner, the Housatonic, was attacked and sunk by a German U-boat. Here's an artistic depiction of what that may have looked like with the German U-2 boat on the left corner, and the ship was a commerce ship that they sunk. The Germans actually sunk multiple commerce ships during World War I. So life in the States was changing dramatically. There were some women that were getting ready to take over jobs that were normally just men's jobs. So women were no longer seen, as in pictured here, in portraits as often as they were seen taking on other bigger roles that I'd like to show you in some of these next pictures. Here's a picture of a woman that is driving one of their taxi cars that before World War I, this was not a common sight to see a woman actually being in charge and driving one of these cars. And here are some cowgirls in Pasadena that are taking over the ranch duties for the men when the men are off at war. And here's one of my favorite photos from this project. It's Helen Johns Kirtland, and she was a photojournalist during World War I. This is her in 1917, and you can see that she even has a gas mask around her neck. And this was very rare to see women in these sort of roles before this time period. And as the women were taking on these new roles and developing more in the workplace, there was also new roles for the children. I wanted to show a picture of what the fashion looked like for the little kids at this time. I thought this was really cute. This was actually a fashion magazine, and you can see on the far right there, it's like a little sailor outfit for a boy, and they're really selling the idea of war, and even doing so by the clothes that they were putting on the children at that time. And as you can see here, the children were even encouraged to help out with the war by, they asked them to save their quarters to help buy war savings stamps. So the propaganda posters, they were also geared towards children to try to get them more excited and on board with the war. One of the other things that I thought was really interesting that I came across is there was a teacher in France that encouraged his students to draw art about the war. So in 1917, when America joined the war, a lot of these pictures started including American flags, and you can see from this picture that the kids really were excited that America was on their side and on board, and I think that they felt a real sense of unity between America at this point. Here you can see another example of that with the American soldiers marching into town with their flags, and you can just see the unity and the excitement of America being there. And that teacher's name was George Hupin, and he was a teacher at St. Iger Elementary School in Paris. And the students that drew these pictures were between ages 8 and 13. And these two pictures specifically were from the spring of 1917. Although a lot of stuff that was going on in our country during 1917 was revolved around the war, there was some art that was going on that really had nothing to do with the war. And I think a couple of these pieces that I came across, the stories behind them were really interesting, so I wanted to share them. So in 1917, a guy named Marcel Duchamp, he created, or I guess you could say found, his art, which was called The Fountain, and this piece was a porcelain urinal, and it was signed Armut. And the story is really a legend in the art world. I guess at this time, the Society of Independent Artists, was in New York, and they claimed that anybody that submitted a piece of art, it would be considered as long as they paid the application fee. So Duchamp, he turned this piece of art in, and it really shook up the whole art world. They didn't know what to think of it. A lot of people really didn't want to accept it because of the rules. It really caused them to take a deeper look at this and define what could and couldn't be art. And I thought that was really interesting. And at the same time, there was also another person that her name was Elsa von Freytag-Lorenhoven. And let's take a look at her piece. Now this piece she called God, and it's another example of the ready-made art. And Duchamp actually coined that term, the one that made the urinal art and called it a fountain. And he coined that term in 1915. But both of these pieces were introduced as art in 1917. And God was a 10.5-inch high cast iron plumbing trap, and she turned that upside down and mounted it on a wooden meter box. And this work is now in the Arsenberg collection in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So some of my favorite art pieces that I came across, which at the time I don't even know if they really would have been considered art, but now they definitely would be, is all the propaganda pieces that they made at the time. It was really the American government's job to try to get the people behind the war. It was a little bit of a difficult task because there were a lot of German immigrants that were more likely to want to side with the Germans and not the French and the British. So all these posters that were made, which I'm going to click through here in a second, these were all made to try to get the American people on board. And this one's, I mean, kind of funny when you look at some of these, but this was really like the mindset of the country at this time. Gee, I wish I were a man. I'd join the Navy. And of course, nowadays, we know women can join the Navy. Be a man and do it. United States Navy Recruitment Station. Here's another one. You can see it is nice in the surf, but what about the men in the trenches? Go and help. I think it was a little bit difficult to try to convince some people that were living really nice lives here in the United States that it was time to give up the good life and get over there and fight in this war. So here's one of their examples of how they were trying to get these men to think they needed to get out of the surf and get over there and fight. And here in this piece, it's the Uncle Sam and flags with the woman that's in distress, that's depicting our country and saying that it's up to you to protect the nation's honor. And I thought this would be a good one to end on since it's a very well known piece of art that we still see to this day. And I found a quote by David H. Mahaly. He's the curator of graphic arts and social history at the Huntington Library and Arts Collection in San Marino. And he talks about how posters really sold the war. These posters inspired you to enlist, to pick up the flag and support your country. They made you, in some cases, fear an enemy or created a fear you didn't know you had. Nations needed to convince the citizens that this war was just and we needed to participate and not sit and watch. There were certainly propaganda posters before 1917, but the organization and mass distribution of World War I posters distinguished them from previous printings. I hope you enjoyed getting to see some of the art from 1917 and how the war really affected our country and the art. And thank you for watching.